Welcome to When Love Hurts, a podcast that explores the abuse of women by men through women's stories and expert insight.
We break down what abuse really is beyond physical violence and look at its deep emotional, psychological, and societal impact.
This podcast is designed for everyone, survivors, support persons, and professionals.
Let's begin.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us again today. Today we are going to be looking at the impact on women. But first,
let's take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're on. We are on the unceded territory of the WSÁNEĆ people on the far west coast of Canada.
I know some of the content we've talked about is heavy. Today is especially quite a heavy episode. So we have all got some tea or coffee in front of us. Some of us have it a little stronger than others. Karen over there is superhuman and doesn't put caffeine in our systems. So we've got our tea or coffee. We invite you to grab a tea or coffee as we dive in, but know that this content can be quite heavy. And we just invite you to give yourself space and time as you listen to this. So historically, interventions are focused on what he's done. What did he do? What led to the abuse? Services gather information around what his actions have been. Did he kick? Did he strangle? What did he do to hurt her? Even women have to prove in courts or to police or to judges or counselors or friends or family, just what is her story? Was it bad enough? Does this count as abuse? What's true and what's not? So that's been the convention. But all of that leaves out her experience.
Yeah,
right.
What's happening to her.
What's happening to her.
Yeah.
That really became apparent when I was working in a men's treatment program as well as the support program for women. And when men would come in, and they were men voluntarily, so they were not court mandated to come to the treatment program, they would come in and they always described not just what he did, but what she did and trying to make it equivalent. So, maybe acknowledging he was abusive, but quickly adding, so was she.
Right. Yeah.
And what they were pointing to are certain acts. And we covered that when we talked about the power and control wheel, that not everybody behaves always in their best moment when they're in a relationship, but it's not abuse. And so, but what we observed is that when men described their behavior, they always had a way of rationalizing it or blaming someone or something else for it. So they never just owned the abuse and their responsibility. In that way, they control the narrative by focusing on why they did something rather than on the impact they had. When we were in the treatment program itself, when we asked men to describe the impact they had, they couldn't.
Wow. They didn't know how their behavior was affecting their partner.
All they could do is describe at a very high level. I don't know. I came home from work. She said something that really pissed me off. I shut down, went downstairs, slammed the door. And then when I came back, everything was fun.
Wow.
Yeah. When you ask a woman about that incident, she starts back 3 weeks ago when he threw the baby into the crib roughly. And she's like, okay, the honeymoon's over, walking on more eggshells. And she describes this whole context in which all that's happening. That's the power and control wheel, like noticing every one of those tactics that is saying to her, you don't have control here. And trying to take it in control will lead to consequences, or sometimes very risky ones. But what it made me start to think about is, okay, those are his actions. What is the impact on women? Men can't describe it. And really, services aren't asking.
No.
Like they focus on what's wrong with her or what he did, but they don't ask about women's experiences. How did that affect you? So that's what we're going to talk about today.
So what are the impacts? What are the impacts that you've heard that have been shared by women?
Well, one of the things that we realized is that no matter, and I think it's an important point before we jump into that, is that no matter what the type of abuse he was using, the impact is the same because the overall dynamic is a loss of freedom, a loss of having a voice, a loss of knowing her own opinion, or at least a loss of being able to express her opinion. All the ways that it's affected the way she can live, the way she can mother or parent, the way she can or can't have family and friends around, the way she practices faith. So all of those things are the big picture, the things that are kind of creating the impact, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like he does this and there's this impact. There's these big impacts that are related to oppression and
Fear. Right?
and fear.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it what I'm hearing there is that just how much he basically takes away her autonomy.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And doesn't just take it away, but like there's always that element of fear and unpredictability. Right. Because if it was predictable, then she could potentially manage that differently. But it's unpredictable. And it's that idea of, I'm in a landmine and I don't know what step is going to create the explosion.
Yeah.
Right. And so every step is calculated. And she also knows that as much as she plans and calculates, she can't control whether there's a misstep, in his opinion.
Yeah.
And so rather than focusing on behaviors, we're really wanting women to have some opportunity to focus on, how did this affect me? That's a very hard question for women to answer because people generally just are not asking women that.
Yeah.
And instead, again, as you said earlier, Allison, they're asking, like, what did he do?
Yeah.
Right? And so we're kind of falling into the dominant discourse trap of, did he use physical violence? Did he sexually assault you? Did he, leave you on the side of the road? But we're not considering the whole context. And it is the context of fear and terror and vulnerability that really has this big impact on every aspect of a woman's life.
Yeah, I also think women, when they're living with abuse, there isn't much opportunity even for them to ask themselves,
Right.
how is this affecting me, right?
Yeah.
Because she's staying focused on him and what he's doing to try to minimize the harm to her and the kids. She can't, keep herself or her kids safe, but she's watching and trying to anticipate the next explosion. So I think this exercise, this tool of thinking about how has the abuse impacted you, really invites women to take some time to think, to answer that question, to think about that.
And isn't that so interesting that that very act of trying to keep herself and her kids protected gets turned against women as, like the language of codependent or overly dependent or too focused on him and not focused on herself. But it's that very act that is trying to keep herself safe.
Yeah.
Back to that question, I think, like, what are some of the impacts that have been shared by women that you're seeing?
Well, I think as we started to talk, fear is really the major impact, and it threads itself through every aspect of a woman's life. So she's constantly calculating, if I do this, what are the potential risks, and is it worth it? And sometimes the honeymoon is a place where women are afforded a little bit more room to make some decisions, like maybe this is a time I can go and visit my mom, or buy something for the kids or for the house that we need, because he's kind of being more agreeable in that manipulation, right?
Yeah.
But underneath that, there's always fear. Even when she's able to act a little bit in her own interests, she knows that underneath that is the possibility that there's going to be a backlash or a response to that. So it changes all of her behavior all of the time. And Karen, you said it, she's now focused on him. Like, there's nothing in this picture that allows her to focus on herself. And so this, like the fear of his reaction, the fear of what tactics he's going to use, the fear of how much it's going to escalate, it's this constant sense of being both vulnerable and trapped. And like, no matter what line of thinking she's following to help herself to get out of this trap, she comes up to a risk.
Yeah. I think there's the risk also with that fear being so pervasive that it can get misdiagnosed as, oh, well, she just must have an anxiety disorder. Or maybe you need to go on medication because it sounds like you're very fearful of everything that's going on, when that doesn't sound like that's the issue at all. Like, that fear is a very real thing, and it's a very present, and she's protecting her safety because her safety is at risk.
Yeah.
And would you say that was really minimized? Like, if you tried to tell somebody that you were afraid, did they like jump in and offer kind of being an ally in that fear, or did they dismiss it as something like anxiety or your own kind of
You're overreacting. You're too sensitive.
Or
Right?
I wonder if, have you tried this? Or I wonder if there's something else you could do to help with that.
Yeah, or just ask them to stop doing whatever, right?
Yeah.
Have you talked to him about this?
Yeah. And so there's the fear. And then when women try to describe it, it gets reframed as a mental health problem, or it gets framed as a way that she's needing to rethink what's happening and fix it.
Thinking about the times when women have said to me that they're paranoid.
Yes.
And I ask a few more questions and I hear something like, they're separated, but he keeps circling her block with his car, right? So that's not being paranoid.
No.
Right? That's being fearful and being fearful for a reason. She sees some form of tension building, right? Like, so she sees something's coming, right? Or sometimes women will say they're hyper vigilant.
Right.
And so often when we hear what's actually going on, we would say, sounds like you're being the right amount of vigilant, right?
Yeah.
Like there's reasons
Yeah.
for fear.
Yeah. I think, what we keep saying is how that really appropriate response gets very distorted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then it becomes this, she has a mental health issue, right? Rather than, no, she is experiencing the impacts of abuse.
And having a normal human reaction to that.
Human reaction.
This is how human beings react.
Yeah.
Exactly.
To being terrorized and controlled and woken up in the middle of the night or whatever, whatever those tactics are.
Yeah.
And for me, that takes us to sort of another category of impact. So that fear that she's carrying in her body almost all the time or all the time shows up in physical ways in her body.
Yeah.
And, if you can, all of us can probably think about like, where does that fear or tension or stress show up in my body? For some people, it might be migraines. Others, it might be irritable bowel syndrome, right? Could be chronic back pain, could be insomnia, can be lots of different things like that. But it's going to show up somewhere in the body. And women notice that they gain weight. They might be eating more to kind of comfort themselves. Or some women also will recognize they're kind of putting on weight to protect themselves from sexual assault is another thing, right? Some women report that they have bladder or yeast infections, and that might be connected to sexual abuse. Something that I would say virtually all women report is that they're exhausted.
Yeah.
They're more forgetful. Like, I'm sure we've all met women who have said to us, I'm worried. Like, I'm forgetting so many things. Like, do I have dementia or something? And no, it's just all this fear and stress and trying to anticipate so much and trying to keep so many balls in the air, because he's forcing that means you forget where you left your keys, right? Or whatever it is. But it shows up in the body in various ways.
What about hair loss? I've heard of that.
Yes.
Women experiencing hair loss.
Yeah, definitely.
And just a general little, they just don't have the same capacity that they would usually have. And then I hear them sort of, wondering what's happening, what's going on. And I have to remind them, this is what's happening. You're going through so much, but they're not seeing it like that.
No. No, and they probably will be going to their doctor, kind of those individual things. I'm having insomnia or I'm having migraines a lot, but probably nobody is asking the question about, what's going on at home and is that maybe affecting you in some way, right?
Another one I've heard is like vaginal pain. They're like experiencing a lot of vaginal pain, dryness, and they'll go to their doctors and being like, I'm wondering if something's wrong. They can't find anything. When in actuality, her body's just responding to the abuse.
Yeah.
So
So
other
true.
related things to reproductive health that we talk less about are things like their partners forcing them into having an abortion or forcing them into pregnancies.
Right.
And then add several children to the exhaustion and the navigating of all of this. And of course, exhaustion is at the top of those lists.
And the more trapped she feels,
the more
right?
trapped
The more
she
children.
feels. So,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and women just not giving consent to, to sexual, like you don't even, intercourse or rape, really. And so all of those have physical impacts for women.
For sure.
Yeah. And then often women get prescribed antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication. They wonder if they're going crazy. The crossover between the physical symptoms and the mental health symptoms, I think there's a big crossover there. But talking more about the mental health, they can feel so isolated. They often will report lack of interest in things that they would have usually have really enjoyed. A loss of energy, feeling disillusioned, distracted, overwhelmed, so confused.
Yes.
As well. I always think that confusion is a real indicator. Actually, of abuse.
Yeah. If a woman's feeling really confused in her relationship, it's good to wonder, like, is this abuse? Because we shouldn't be confused by our partners, right?
Yeah, exactly. Another thing that women report is really wanting to avoid people and crowds, and yet feeling so lonely at the same time, feeling suicidal.
So many women over the
Really
years
common.
have talked about feeling suicidal. And how I've come to think of that is because thankfully, if I haven't known a woman to commit suicide, I'm thankful. Die by suicide, I'm thankful for that. But she feels so trapped, and her brain is like, how do I get out of this? Right. And maybe even like, oh, I said till death do us part. So the only way out of this is if one of us dies, kind of thing. So they have that thought, which is so painful, right? And at the same time, most women will also say, like, I would never leave my children with this person, right? But just it indicates how horrible the impact is, right?
Yes.
That women's brains go to there.
Exactly.
That's their only solution.
That's,
Yeah, that they just feel so trapped. Panic attacks. And if the woman hasn't at this point, necessarily put it together that what she's experiencing is actually abuse,
right.
then she just has no idea what's going on.
Right. And she's going to get medicated.
Yes.
And then if he knows that, he's going to use that, right? Like,
He's going to say,
that you're crazy, right? Because you're on medication.
Yeah, actually, I had a story of a woman who she went on some medication, and then one day she's trying to have a conversation with her partner. He doesn't agree with what she's saying, and he basically says, how's that medication? I think you should actually ask for some more.
Right. You should increase your medication.
And there was nothing she could do to actually have a proper conversation. He just used it against her. Yeah, and women talk about they use drugs more. They watch TV more. They gamble more. They do all sorts of things to try and cope with the
Coping
awful
strategies.
effects of what they're experiencing.
We could go on forever and talk about more, and women have shared more, right?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, one of the things that always impacts me is when the two of you, Jill and Karen, share, like, when they first asked this question, they filled 7 flip charts full of what women shared were the impacts of this.
One group of women.
Yeah, just
One group of women.
Yeah.
And so that list is bigger than even that. So, I mean,
hold on, how many women is that? We're just talking
7 or 8.
Okay, so we're not talking like 30 women.
No, it's not a major poll.
Related to that, when we ask service providers, when we're doing trainings, they can't come up with nearly as many.
No.
And they go to the dominant discourse thinking mostly about, say, physical assault and some of the injury and mental abuse.
They might say it'll
mental
affect
health,
her self-esteem, right? Like something like that.
Depression, anxiety.
But not all of the detail that we're trying to get some sense of today.
So another category, I mean, you said that, is self-esteem, but the one is like the loss of self. And that can be so damaging to who she saw she was, right? Like becoming a shell. One woman described it as becoming a shell of who she was. Like didn't even really know herself anymore.
Right.
Like seeing herself yelling at the kids or yelling at her pets. And before she never was angry, really. She didn't have that same ability, or like feeling like she was a prostitute.
Because
And
of sexual abuse.
because of
how it's used her body.
Or having her creativity be completely fall flat. And like once she used to be able to paint all day long and was an artist, and now she can't pick up the paintbrush. There's this loss of who she thought she was, or who she truly is. She will get herself back.
Yes.
But it is gone. Or even the ability to trust men again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And wondering, if she leaves, will I ever be able to find a trustworthy
Yep.
man again?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many big losses for women. We will talk more about that in an upcoming episode around those losses, but that loss of self is excruciating.
Yeah.
Because, again, we've all said in the moment, women aren't paying attention to what is happening to me, but when they have a moment to reflect, it's like, that's so powerful.
Yeah.
Like I used to be, right? I
Yes.
used to have a sense of humor, or I used to love volunteering or going to yoga, and all of those they've had to let go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
As part of their identity, right? And that's what we're talking about here is
Yeah.
losing who they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is so much what he wants.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He wants that to
Yeah.
happen. He
Yeah.
wants to
Yeah.
take that away.
Yeah. And, and even like, not being able to be a sister or a daughter.
Yeah.
Right?
In the way that you want to be.
Yeah.
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 For sure.
And then there's the bigger picture. So these are all things that are happening for the woman. And again, if you haven't kind of really picked this up, we're really, what we hear from women is that they come in thinking there's something wrong with them. And how we want them to reframe is that something significant has happened to them. And that's such a different way of supporting women. It's like we don't see women as being like somehow flawed or problematic or need fixing. We see women as needing support
Yeah.
and care because something terrible has happened to them
Yeah.
over a long period of time.
Yeah.
And that's for them. And then they kind of hit the systemic problems as well. And that's another level of impact, that they are forced into like at least being financially vulnerable. Maybe they've had to let go of a job because all these other impacts have meant that they can't get to work every day.
Yeah.
Or he has just completely bankrupted them, or again, hidden money so that she doesn't have access, or tied the assets up in court for years. So she's living in poverty. She'll lose potentially her home and her community and the kids' school community.
Which is huge.
It's
Think
huge.
about that.
Yeah.
And you're already dealing with all those other impacts that we've just listed.
Yeah.
And then that happens as well. Like,
I had an experience, we had a house fire and it wasn't significant. And so my partner and son moved to the basement and I moved into a neighbor's basement. And every day I get up and I didn't have my clothes. I didn't have I didn't have what's important to me.
Yep.
I lost my routine and I lost kind of my anchor to the world. And I think, when we suggest women go to a women's shelter or that they need to leave, we don't begin to imagine the disruption and the losses that are there.
Yeah. So true.
yeah.
And then if they're forced to move to another community
Right.
or the faith community that they leaned heavily on is now turned to support him and away from her, these are all very significant losses. Also, women think, well, at least I have the legal, the justice system will stand with me because he's in the wrong, he was abusive,
Right.
and I'm just trying to protect myself and my children. And when they realize that the legal system is going to disappoint them and often compound the abuse by taking away their power or using their power to
Silencing them in various ways.
Yeah. So these are all like bigger impacts when you kind of lose faith and lose hope in all of these systems that you thought were going to be there if you ever needed them. And I don't know, you've probably heard that from women, like just how disappointed they are.
Yeah, I think
Absolutely.
they have this world view that like, okay,
yes.
I'm going to be protected.
Yes.
Well, if I'm not going to be protected here, I'm going to at least have the justice system or I have that extra layer. And when that doesn't turn out the way it's expected or the way you thought it would turn out, that is a huge loss and can turn a woman's head upside down. And I've heard that from so many women where they are feeling, okay, they are starting to find their feet again post-separation, post-divorce, but then they're still in this court system.
Yeah.
They're like, I'm back to where I was. Like, I'm feeling the anxiety. I'm getting panic attacks again. I'm not sleeping again. And some of the impact comes back because they're back into this loss of hope and safety.
Yeah. And the legal system really allows the man to continue to abuse her through the system.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
She's been controlled again, but in a different way.
Yeah.
So again, like we talked about with religion, that he kind of aligns with the legal system. So it's me in the legal system that think you're wrong and that you can't parent, and we're not going to allow you to protect your children. And not only is it devastating, but again, repeats all those the harms and the impact of those harms.
It's making me think as well of how a woman is impacted by the way that society doesn't understand abuse. Because often, let's say a woman, she's talking to a friend and the friend says, oh, he can't do that. You need to take him to court.
Right.
There's laws against this. And the woman actually at this point probably knows that, like we've just been saying, that the legal system is not going to help her.
Yeah.
And this friend, well-meaning, doesn't get that.
Right.
And that's another disappointment that women can't find appropriate supports and people that understand them.
Right. And then sometimes those friends think, well, she just isn't doing this right? Because she should not be in court for 10 years or whatever she must be doing. Or so horrifically, some women have said, like friends have said, you must just like the drama. Right. Such a terrible thing, right?
Yeah.
She just wants to be out of court. She wants peace in her life. She wants her children to be safe. Yeah.
Making the list in and of itself can be really affirming and validating. Also really eye-opening and shocking. But it also highlights like what women do have in common.
And can I just say, in common, despite what tactics their partners were using, I think that was the major finding for us, is that no matter what of that power and control wheel he was using, the impacts are the same for women. That is really for us such a primary learning, and one that's, we've really drawn on for 35 years. We know it doesn't matter what he's doing. We know that all women are going to be impacted in similar ways.
And really, again, challenges that dominant discourse that, this type of abuse is really awful. Instead of like the sort of constant undermining, constant threats, et cetera, which also has just a huge devastating impact.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, we have to ask the question then, what changes when we look at the impact of the abuse, or why is this such an important piece in understanding the abuse and supporting women, children, and ultimately the abuser also?
This tool of the impact list is so helpful for women to really, really see that they're just having normal human reactions to what their partner's doing. This is what human beings do. Because it sort of starts to pile on for the woman, right? Like there's the abuse, and then she has the impact of abuse, and then she's shamed and blamed for having that impact, right? Like she should be able to do better, function better, or whatever. And something that's so beautiful that we've really learned from women is that if they get a break from the abuse, whether that's a short break or they separate and they create some physical distance, some of that impact starts to lift.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can talk about what happened for me as I was discovering what was going on and starting to make sense of what was really happening. My partner went away for 3 weeks unexpectedly. To begin with, I was like, oh my goodness, how am I going to cope with the kids, and all of this. What ended up happening was I got much needed space. I noticed that when he wasn't there, I started to feel better.
Right.
Actually, I was doing fine looking after the kids. I was able to cope. I felt happy. And during that 3-week period, it was a key part of me being able to take stock and realize that I was living in that, that analogy that we've been talking about of the raging river. It was as if I'd been going down those rapids and I'd been tossed and turned and had no time to even, know where I was. And then I'd come to this calm pool. And obviously the rapid was going to continue. But for a moment, I was able to just kind of be and think. Yeah. And I did a lot of research during those 3 weeks. I was able to look through journals. I did a lot of stuff and it was super, super helpful. So
I think you've named in there too how the impact can start to lift for the kids too. Like sometimes women are very fearful about separating because they're like, I can't parent these children on my own. And he's probably reinforced that idea. But if the children can be living in a more peaceful place some of the time, often some of their behavior that might be quite challenging might start to settle a little bit too. Yeah, and this exercise, again, just really helps women to know that they're not crazy, right? That women genuinely are worried. That sometimes they'll just say like, I think I'm crazy, or I think I'm losing my mind, or whatever.
Yeah.
When we frame it as impact of abuse, that really helps. That they're not responsible for the problem. Like he's responsible for the problem 100%. It's impacting her. It's having an effect on her, but he's responsible. She's not to blame. I think too, when women see this list and hear some similarities, it helps them not feel so alone, right? Oh, other women are exhausted all the time. Other women have insomnia. Other women have had their hair fall out, right? Like some of these things, it's like, wow, I thought that was just me that was having that reaction, right? So it helps them to not feel so alone. And I think it starts to help the woman to tell the story, to tell her own story, right?
Yeah.
The abuser has a very loud voice in the relationship, and he's telling the story of the relationship, right? That she's not very smart, that she's scattered, that she's forgetful, that she can never get the kids to school on time, whatever any of that is. And for her to start to tell it, even just within herself, within the safety of a friendship or a counselor, like, abuse is happening, and these are the ways that it's affecting me, right? And to really be able to tell that in her own words.
You know, one of the things that I think it really lifts is the worry, right? That women are often very worried that they have something physically wrong, seriously physically wrong, like a brain tumor or a heart condition.
Right.
Often women talk about feeling very dizzy or faint or kind of losing consciousness once in a while. And like the relief, you know, and of course we always say, like, make sure you're not just diagnosing those things. Like,
go to your doctor if you don't dispenser and make sure.
Right. But often it's that story of they don't find anything. And so then it's dismissed as, like, again, in her head. So the system can kind of reinforce that she's crazy or mentally unstable. But it lifts the worry for women. It's like, okay, I'm not dying of, you know, cancer somewhere or...
Another thing, it takes away the power of his words. If she can start to hear this new understanding, he might still be in her ear telling her something.
Right.
And she can then pull on this new narrative and find strength. And push that away. Maybe not, you know, that might not be safe in the actual moment, but just there's a barrier that's
within
there.
herself.
And that grows and grows.
And start to see herself as actually strong and resilient, capable, and surviving something very, very difficult.
Right.
And in the end, this helps her seek out the right kind of help.
It does.
Maybe the doctor isn't the right place, but maybe it is, but it's truly when she starts to understand that, she can start to find the right type of help.
So instead of trying to treat individual impacts, seeing those impacts as a cluster of response to the abuse, right? And the place that she could then focus on is, how do I get support for navigating, surviving the abuse, right?
Rather than getting fixed for problems. It's such a different frame, isn't it? Support to navigate versus there's something wrong with you that I'll fix.
And we so believe women deserve good support and the right kind of support, no matter what she's choosing to do, right? Like something you say, right, is that it's really, really, really hard to live with a man who's abusive. It's really, really, really hard to leave a man who's abusive. So just having support, no matter what might be happening at the time, is so important. And just that support can start to lift some of the impact.
Exactly.
I think, right? That maybe that sense of isolation or sense that she is crazy or she's stupid or whatever, that just connecting with people who can be affirming and kind to her, that can start to lift some of the impact.
Exactly. Think again about that raging river. That support is like the life jacket.
Right.
She's able to keep her head above water a little bit more, not just on her own, not just using her own strength. That life jacket is now holding her up a bit.
one of the things that I really learned when I was leading support groups and we were creating these lists of impacts that was so helpful when I moved to the women's hospital that I worked at for almost 20 years was how to translate these impacts into the healthcare setting, right? Often healthcare people are working from the model of identify the problem and then put some treatment in place. And that's just, when it comes to woman abuse, that's just not a reasonable model.
No.
And it's not an appropriate model. And so I had this list of impacts. And for me, then it was, so how do we train and help providers come from a frame of reinterpreting what they think they're seeing in front of us? So in a way, it's a differential diagnosis. Like maybe it's an ulcer, or and it might be an ulcer, but what's the treatment plan? Or maybe it is vaginal dryness, or maybe it's non-consensual rape over and over again.
Exactly.
Or recurring bladder infections. There's a likelihood that somebody's going to say she's not taking her medications, or she's going to go for all kinds of tests, but there's no room for her to say that actually my partner rapes me. And so we bring this list of impacts. And one of the things that I think was missing, we were focusing on all the physical impacts and trying to make those connections, but we hadn't really taken the leap from a teaching perspective about mental health and also substance use.
Right.
I had a team member who was working with us, and she was working in a women's shelter. And she came back to the team and said, there's a practice out there where women aren't allowed into some women's shelters. They're getting sent to addictions treatment or substance use treatment or mental health to get those things taken care of before they are allowed into a shelter. And I thought, well, that's right. Like, I worked in a women's shelter. It's like these are women who are not easy to have in that context. And it was, in retrospect, such a painful bias that I'm so kind of like feel so mortified by that we left out so many women that needed support. Anyway, I was convinced by this team member that we needed to do more exploration. So over 5 years, we conducted about 600 consultations around the province of BC, asking mental health, substance use, and violence against women workers what the connections are between violence against women, mental health, and substance use. And then we asked 250 women, as we always do. We ask women about their experiences. And over again, despite what the dominant discourse tells us, that these are separate issues, what we heard from women is that they're connected.
Right.
They all belong together. And the most important finding of all is that women's experiences of violence, so men's violence against women, precedes the development of substance use and mental health.
Of course, right? When you say it like that, it just makes absolute sense.
But we had it flipped. 20 or 30 years ago, for sure, we had it flipped. That it was like, well, vulnerable women are more likely to be abused. So women with mental health problems, or who live in the downtown east side, or who are substance using, are more likely to be targeted. We know that's not true. And over and over again, with the exception of maybe 4 women out of 250 told us that that their substance use came as a result of the abuse.
It's interesting, like, how that dominant discourse and that bias infiltrates our thinking, and like it can infiltrate our thinking, right? Like,
we have to be careful.
It's something that is like, it's so ingrained in us. And like, I still see, like, I'm not in the province of BC, so I'm still seeing those issues being treated as separate issues. The sad part is it's like we're seeing social media feed into these to these beliefs that they're separate issues, or even social media, like I thinking of how it's normalized that a mom is drinking mid-afternoon to survive her day, was like, okay, why aren't we asking the question, why is she needing to drink mid-afternoon to survive her day? Like, maybe isn't something that we should be normalizing. And there's some issues there that we...
or dismissing as, like it's kind of dismissive, isn't it? That we're not taking it seriously.
Yeah, it's kind of a joke, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's serving as a distraction.
I mean, there's just so much about this that's the dominant discourse, right? Like, in women's shelters, because I don't think BC has changed. I think it was changing while our team was working. there, but the team is no longer there, and it's been 10 years. And as Karen and I travel the province, we hear from most transition houses that they're quite high barriers. So they still have some beliefs about those women who are substance using, that they're going to be disruptive, that they're going to trigger other women, that they're going to be unsafe for their kids, for other kids to be around. And what we think is these are women who are experiencing abuse, and maybe even more so, they're more vulnerable and need protection.
Yeah.
And the fact that we think we can leave them out of service because they're more difficult is very problematic as a practice. So I don't think it's just your province. I think everyone's still so committed to that dominant discourse that they're the problem, and that substance use, somehow they're different women. Right? One of the things that we find when we use the cycle of abuse or the power and control, if we ask women about substance use, they'll tell us. They use it generally after the escalation or the explosion because it's a way of coping and medicating some of that pain. And they want to talk about it. But if no one's asking, what's the connection? They're too afraid. They're afraid they're going to get kicked out of a service. They're afraid that they're going to be judged and stigmatized, and so they don't talk about it. So we learned that violence and abuse predates mental health and substance use very clearly, and that most mental health concerns are the impacts of abuse. And that's not to minimize other very significant mental health concerns that might actually not be connected. But for women who are impacted by abuse, it's likely that there are lots of mental health effects or concerns that women have.
If she does have an underlying mental health concern, the abuse is going to make that so much worse, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We also did some research because we were curious about how documents, like health documents, were used in legal settings. And what we learned was even when physicians were creating records to support a woman around the abuse she was experiencing, they got used against her in court because it also had, things like queried domestic violence or like substance, like seeking substances or seeking prescription medication inappropriately, or seems flighty, or concerned about her parenting. And they were all kind of queries. They were never talked about with the woman. So women told us, I thought when I told my physician, that was kind of protection for me if I ever needed that record. But actually, we did a big case law review, and almost all records get used against women. And of course, the abuser has access to those records, and they know most intimately the history of the woman's health. Women are just not very protected from a health care response. We know, for example, that depression, we've talked about some of the things that might be bundled into trauma responses, substance use issues, feeling suicidal. Those are 3 to 5 times higher than for women experiencing abuse than they are among the general population.
Wow. That's a huge number.
That's huge.
Huge number.
That's huge.
Yeah.
So we think if women are presenting that way or telling somebody that, eating disorders also falls into that category. And for young women, even higher kind of difference between populations that aren't experiencing abuse. And so, that should be the first signal to us that maybe there's more going on.
Yes, absolutely.
Alcohol dependency is much as 15 times more prevalent among women experiencing abuse than the general population. So again, if we see a woman who's substance using or using alcohol, it's the first thing we should think of. Right?
Yeah.
I always remember one interview that we did with a woman. She had recently come out of an addictions treatment program, and she told us a number of aspects that were very helpful to understand the connection. But one of the things she said is, my addiction was the solution. My problem is abusive relationships. And similarly, with mental health, that they, like, women often say that they call it mental health, but for me, it's the impacts of abuse.
Absolutely.
Right? The symptoms of abuse is what. Sometimes we think now about mental health and substance use being concurrent or co-occurring. But again, from this frame and from the voice of women, what's missing is what is the root cause, which is gendered violence, men's violence against women. And so I love this quote from Warshaw. And she says, what appears to be a constellation of symptoms or disorders may reflect a normal response to abuse and the social realities of continued isolation and danger.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
This makes me think about women who've come for counselling and not realising that they have been subject to abuse. And they come, and then I start to hear their story, and then I'm able to say, actually, I think perhaps this is what's happening for you. And similarly with couples counseling, I do wonder how many, couples that seek out couples counseling are actually dealing with the power and control of a man over a woman. Yeah.
Well, we know this happens to 1 in 3 women, right?
So it stands to reason.
Yes.
Yeah.
That a couples counselor should have that up as
Yes.
maybe one of the main things they're looking for or
Exactly.
wondering about. But that doesn't seem to be practice.
No, it's not. And also they have the dominant discourse that if it is, if it's abuse, it's physical. It's going to be, they can perhaps screen it out, which we know they can't.
Yeah.
But I mean, even in my training to become a counselor, we're still looking at it sometimes as separate things.
Right.
Yeah.
So this isn't something that is starting to be taught in our training programs.
That's right. Yeah.
That leads to like we really need to be getting the right type of information out there.
Yeah.
And what I see is like what we need to hear is from the women.
Right.
Like when we actually are listening to her, then we are actually getting an accurate description of what's happening.
Yeah.
And we can learn how to support her from her versus trying to support her in a way we think is what's best, yet we realize now she's the expert
Exactly.
and should be treating her as such.
Yeah.
Yeah, because often what's best practice will be more about medicating women.
Yep.
Right. And sending them to the right service, which is often the wrong service.
Yeah.
So best practice that idea of best practice is so outdated. And, this research and other research around the world supporting these connections is at least 15 years old. And service providers, that's how powerful the dominant discourse is, that in some ways it just stands in as an opinion and people use it as data. Like my opinion is not research, right? Research is really talking to the hundreds of women that we've talked to, both systematically and in every one of our encounters. And that's the data. But, people are still using their opinion, like the cab driver, the Uber driver, as they know as much as the 4 of us know about this and all the research. So we really want to see services using, as you say, the current research and best practices around this. And, we often feel sort of the pushback to these ideas.
Yeah.
And those pushbacks are not based on successful practices and they're not based on the data or the research.
Yeah.
And most importantly, not based on what women say they need.
Right. So if we start to shift to first thinking about the impact rather than what he's doing and why it like that completely shifts the intervention and the support that is being offered to women. And then how do we hold the men accountable, right? Like we are shifting that.
Yep.
And how really the dominant discourse is just serving to distract us from supporting women in compassionate and relevant ways. Yeah. I think we have to finish with this question of, will it always feel this bad for her? And will the impacts last forever?
Right. Such a painful and good question, right? So, some of you as listeners, if you've been thinking about, okay, so how has the abuse impacted me? And you're looking at a pretty long list and you might be feeling a lot of heaviness around that. What we can really say with quite a bit of confidence is that if you can get a break from the abuse in some way, whether that's you can go to your sister's place for a little while, or maybe you do have a temporary separation or something, that some of this impact will begin to lift.
Yeah.
And some impact can lift faster than other things. Like, a woman who's left with $50,000 debt, it's going to take time to recover from that, right? The other thing probably really important to keep in mind is we know abuse doesn't stop with separation, right?
Yeah.
So you may be living apart from him, but you're actually, and so you've done lots of things to try to limit the ways that he can abuse you. You've maybe divided assets. You're only communicating through one means, whatever it is. You've done various things to try to limit the ways that he can get at you. But if you have children in common, particularly, you are still going to be experiencing abuse. He's going to use, whether it's the transfers or the court system or whatever, to continue to abuse. So you are going to continue to have impact, right? Yeah. So sometimes a woman is feeling really quite great for a while and feeling stronger and making new friendships and, maybe thinking about going back to school. And then he initiates another court application, right? And then we meet her in a counseling appointment and she's disappointed in herself, right?
Yeah.
Because she's so scared and she's not sleeping and she can't concentrate and she can't focus and she's not patient with her children, right? And it's so important to, again, frame that as impact.
Yeah.
But definitely wanting to really leave a hopeful note here for women, because Jill and I have done this work for so long. We know women who have been out of that abusive relationship for a long time. And it's part of what keeps us doing this work is that we see that women they get themselves back. Yeah. They come back alive. They get clarity within themselves. They pursue their passions and dreams. They build friendships. And that is so beautiful. And so, yes, you can and you will recover. This is the impact of the abuse. It is not something inherently wrong with you. It is connected to the abuse.
Something I would love to share is Joe and I have shared a little bit about our stories. But that's where that raging river analogy comes from. And we talked a lot about what it's like and what we feel like. And we know that the raging river and the river doesn't stop necessarily. But when we get to be in a life raft with maybe now we have a guide with us. Now we get to wear a life jacket. We get to hold hands with the other women that are going through it. That it is so much easier to navigate. Yeah. And the impact isn't the same as when you were
all by yourself
without any of those extra life-saving supports.
Yeah, exactly.
You are no longer drowning in the same way.
Yeah. And I just want to sort of emphasize that, the supports you can get are, obviously this podcast, you can read the When Love Hurts book. You can find a lot of information on the When Love Hurts website. Going to a When Love Hurts support group, that is like a major piece of support. That's really where you're now in the life raft with the other women and with that guide. So it's hugely transformative. And the raging river, like you say, it's still going. But how you're then tackling it and how you're living your life is very, very different. Yeah, as a result of that support that you've now got.
I think it's important to take time to appreciate all that you do to survive the really awful reality you might be living in.
Yeah.
And if you are supporting someone who's living in that reality, seeing their strength and resiliency can also give you some hope. And knowing that she is an incredible human.
Yeah.
That is surviving a lot.
Yeah. And knowing that being that support person, simply caring, listening, believing, walking alongside, you make such a difference for a woman.
Yeah.
You don't need to have the answers.
No.
You can't have the answers, right?
Yeah.
But you can be supportive and caring.
Yeah. Just simply telling her she's doing a really good job.
Yeah.
Can be just so helpful.
Yeah.
So as always, if you want more information, we invite you to hop over to the website, the whenlovehurts.ca, and we can give you more information. We have shared, as Joe shared, that there is support groups, but if you can't find a support group that is close to you, we hope that this podcast can give you a glimpse of other women's stories so that you don't feel so alone, and finding courage to share with someone that will believe you and finding the right type of support. And we do invite you to like, share, subscribe so that more people can access this content. We do very much appreciate the support we've already received. And again, thank you to MCC Canada for their generosity in supporting this season of the podcast. And if you want more of this podcast, we are looking for that next sponsor for next season to provide more information and get more relevant information into the hands of those who need it. So if you are interested, please contact us through the When Love Hurts website, whenlovehurts.ca. Thank you.